Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a highly respected professional, a global thinker, an author, coming to The Brand Called You for a second time from the US, Mr. Kon Apostolopoulos. Kon,
Excellent.
welcome to the show.
Thank you, my friend. It's a pleasure to join you again. I'm always excited to meet with you, to talk with you, and to share the space with you.
Thank you. Kon is the author of a recently published book called The Engagement Blueprint, Building a Culture of Commitment and Performance. He's the founder and chief executive officer of Fresh Biz Solutions, which is the human capital management consulting group. He's the founding partner of the Global Institute for Thought Leadership, and he's a Thinkers 360 Global Top 50 Thought Leader and author of another book which we spoke about in our earlier conversation, which is Seven Key Ways to Navigating a Crisis. So, Con, since we've already spoken in the past, I'm going to jump straight into your new book,
Mm.
The Engagement Blueprint, Building a Culture of Commitment and Performance. And before I ask you a question, I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Con's book. I'm going to do the same. So, my question is, what was the inspiration to write the Engagement Blueprint?
That's a fantastic question, and not an easy one to start with, but it's an
Mhm.
important one. I would say that a big part of the inspiration for me was following the pandemic a few years ago,
Mm.
with the advent and the events that happened here, at least in the US, with the great resignation, millions of people leaving their jobs just after the economy had started opening up,
Yeah.
seeking different ways of operating. And then eventually, the ones that did remain falling into this trend of quiet quitting, which is another way of saying that they were not engaged at work.
Mm. Mm.
It Looking at that on one hand and juxtaposing that to the experiences that I was having with my own clients who were having a very different experience. They were blossoming, they were flourishing at the time, and their best and brightest people were remaining and wanted to remain. If anything, the companies became a beacon for others, attracting others to them. And I was looking at those two opposite examples and thinking, why is that? And I realized that the 30 years in this business of leading people, of working with talent, of developing teams, we were doing things that were making the company, if not immune, very resistant to these kind of trends. And they
Mm.
were able to keep their best and brightest, flourish at a time of difficulty. Why? Because they were creating an environment. The leaders that we had developed were creating an environment where people felt engaged and they felt motivated to give their best. The commitment levels between employees and the company were very high,
Mm.
and performance was through the roof in all of the key areas, Ashutosh. So
Amazing.
that led me to think there must be something here.
Yep.
There must be something here. And that's when I
Mm.
started my research over a course of about 18 months.
Mm.
And I uncovered some very interesting ideas that are now included in the book.
Fantastic. And how do you define a culture of commitment in the workplace? And why is
Hmm.
it critical to organizational success?
Culture of commitment is built on a foundation of trust
Mm.
between employers and employees. We've all experienced that pendulum swinging, and at different times, different economic times, it feels like employers have the power in their hand and they can pick and choose who they bring onto their companies. And at times when there seems to be a lot of work and a shortage of good talent, it seems that pendulum swings to the other side, and the employees seem to be able to walk out of one business and into the other one in the same
Mm.
day because they are highly valued or people need them. And so when you have this, that creates a lot of problems for people and organizations. Whereas in a culture of commitment, what we see is a trust, a bond, an acceptance between employers and employees. And that trust allows them to operate beyond just the transactional way of,
Mm.
I pay you, you do this. It's much more. It allows employees to become part of the broader team, to see themselves inside the company and see the company as their own, take ownership of that. And then from that perspective, be able to give their best, offer their discretionary effort, that effort that really makes the difference, that is above and beyond just what they're getting paid for, so to speak. Essentially, I liken it to the difference between running in broad daylight in an open space and trying to run in the dark. When there is no trust, you are essentially trying to run in the dark and you are unsure of your surroundings, unsure of the footing that you have, constantly afraid that you're going to run into things. You're not going to be at your best. You're not going to be able to move as quickly and as well as you would in bright light.
Great response. And what are some of the common misconceptions about employee engagement that you aim to debunk in your book?
One of the things we talk about very early, and this is part of the engagement theory that many have spoken about as well. Many companies assume that employee engagement means employee satisfaction. And that's just not the case. Yeah. I know a lot of satisfied employees that gladly picked up that phone call from a recruiter and went off because they offered them a better salary or better benefits. Employee engagement is also not employee happiness. I mean, for anybody, for example, that's gone into a restaurant or a retail establishment, you can see happy employees happily talking among themselves or checking their cell phones or doing other things, but they're not happily engaged with the clients in the business. And so that has nothing to do with a true employee engagement, which is a much deeper commitment and a commitment between, like I said, the organization and its employees, the team and the individual.
And what would you say are some of the key drivers of employee engagement? And how can leaders leverage these?
Well, through my research that I did, as I mentioned to you, over 18 months, I looked at the trends, the behaviors, the patterns. I also looked at what the theory was at the time and the existing theory. And essentially, I can narrow it down into 4 key drivers of engagement. And that's what I've captured in the book. And these drivers essentially are aligned with 4 human needs that we have. This is not about employees and employers anymore. It is about human nature. And those 4 drivers are essentially our need to feel valued, our need to feel connected, our need to feel productive and contributing members of the team, and ultimately our need to feel supported to learn and grow in our life. Those are the 4 drivers that make a difference.
Yeah. Fascinating. And conversely, how can leaders recognize early signs of disengagement in their teams? And what can they do?
So leaders play a big part. Essentially, they are the difference maker between an engaged workforce and one that is not. The signs that they should be looking for are very evident in many ways because people start, first of all, withdrawing. In one sense, you see the problems in attendance. They start coming in late. They don't care. They don't show up for work, or they don't step in to take ownership of activities. They don't volunteer for anything. They withdraw from that. They stop being a productive member of the team, only doing the bare essentials. You can see it in the way that they operate and engage with others. They're either distant from the team, or in some cases, even worse, they are externalizing a lot of their frustration, their angst, their fears, and starting to poisoning the team through conversations. You can see that in all of those different behaviors. They become critical of everything around them. They are essentially not wanting to be there in a very obvious way, and that progressively gets worse, and it starts spreading among team members. It can have a catastrophic impact on your team, almost like a cancer spreading within your organization. Right. And surprisingly, when you look at the studies here in the US, which is fairly business-driven culture, studies show that only 1 in 3 people are actually identifying as being engaged, whereas essentially 1 in 6 are saying that they are actively disengaged, the cancers in your organization. Now, when you look abroad, those numbers are actually even scarier. The number becomes 1 in 5 that are identifying as engaged, whereas the disengaged people are even higher.
And Con, is there a relationship between psychological safety and employee engagement?
Oh, very direct one, if I may.
Mhm.
Um, in many ways, psychological safety is a subset of the need we have to feel valued.
Mm.
When we when leaders create the kind of environment where people feel valued, they provide first and foremost safety for that person to be able to operate well. And that safety is the psychological safety that you just mentioned. We all know what kind of environment it looks like when you can walk in and on the surface it seems like everything is okay, yet people feel like they're walking on eggshells. Nobody is comfortable expressing their opinion. Nobody is comfortable being able to bring up bad news or say something contrary to the leader's direction. And so people are very reserved, and the organization loses because they don't have the input, those voices bringing good ideas or pointing out problems potentially that could be happening. So that psychological safety is just as important for organizations as any physical safety that we have.
Right,
I
right.
work with a lot of organizations that there are physical demands on their environment,
Mm.
and that is important. So safety is a key part of a leader's responsibility to make sure that people feel valued and
Mm.
appreciated in their work.
Mm. Amazing. I also wanted to get your perspective on culture.
Hmm.
When if you look at, and I worked in several countries in the world, culture also leads to maybe loyalty, maybe commitment to the company. But how does culture impact employee engagement, especially in a globalized world?
Hmm. Um, in order to answer that question, I actually took some bold steps and I interviewed some folks, leaders that I admire and I appreciate that have that kind of experience working with people within their teams across the globe. Some of them from the HR space that worked for global companies, like my friend Stéphane Charbonnier, who is the former chief HR officer of L'Oreal Global. Well, he shared with me that throughout the cultures where the company has a presence, these were universal truths. The drivers that we discussed, the things that we talked about, the need to feel valued, the need to feel connected, productive, and supported were universal across cultures, across continents, across
Mm.
boundaries,
Mm.
because they are human needs. The same with my good friend Andrew Filson, who's the president of Coors Tech,
Mm.
another global company with organization with manufacturing plants in Asia, Europe,
Yep.
Africa, the US, everywhere. These are universal truths. And that's why it's so important for us to look at these, Ashutosh, and
Mm.
embrace these. My own clients, I have clients across the world. These principles hold true because they are human needs.
Mm. The other perspective that I had said I must ask you is that post the pandemic, work has changed quite considerably. With hybrid work, work from home, and so many other different terms that are being used. What strategies can leaders use to ensure that their employees feel connected even when they are working remotely?
Again, a very good question for us. To me, we have gone back and forth, and the balance between on-site in-person work and remote work fluctuates depending on the company and the organization.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, there's still about a third of the workforce that is unable to work remotely, even if they wanted to. But for the remaining ones, you see a different variations of that. I'm not going to debate the benefits and drawbacks of that.
Yep.
But
Yep.
what leaders can do here in this
Mm.
case,
Mm.
in order to engage their teams more, is truly to embrace a paradoxical approach, if you will. Embrace the leadership paradox that takes two seemingly opposite concepts and bonds them together, synthesizes them together in a new way of leading.
Mm.
Well, let me give you an example. If I'm a leader of a virtual team or somebody who works remotely on my team,
Mm.
in order to maintain that level of engagement, I need to first and foremost show empathy and understanding for their situation, because not everybody has a home office. So many people are working remotely from their kitchen table,
Yep.
surrounded by a lot of distractions and everything else. And sometimes they have to adjust their work schedule in order to be able to give me me their best. So empathy on one side, but on the other side, tough love, being able to set clear boundaries and expectations that allows this person to function, to do well without burning out.
Right.
Another one could be high human touch and high technology.
Right.
In many ways, we need to replace those moments that we have in person with very purposeful activity using technology to be able to collaborate and stay connected. You and I, for example, now are on 2 points on opposite sides of the globe.
Correct.
Yet here we are having a wonderful conversation together.
Absolutely.
Using
Absolutely.
technology.
Correct. But since you spoke about technology, do you see technology as a factor in being able to measure, but more important than measure, improve employee engagement?
My general theory about technology, because I'm a big proponent of a human-centered workplace, but technology does have an important part to play. Technology can make a wonderful assistant and a tool, but a terrible master. If we rely solely on technology to replace many of the things that we as human beings are uniquely positioned to deliver, that's a problem. Even with AI, to me, embrace AI, but also bring the human element, that human instinct into the situation. So we can measure a lot of the measurables through AI and a lot of the results, the outputs, but we cannot always capture the instincts, the feelings, the emotions that are involved with that beyond a certain point. Perhaps one day as AI evolves, we'll be able to do a better job with that.
Right.
But right now, the creativity, the innovation, the instinct, a lot of those things are fairly unique to individuals, and we need to embrace both. Use the tools where appropriate, but trust your instinct as a leader, and never delegate or outsource that connection with your team.
Very well said. And Con, what role does emotional intelligence play in building a culture of engagement and high performance?
Well, in my mind, emotional intelligence is one of the key factors of effective leadership. And the best way for us to be able to predict success with our leaders, with the people that we work with. People that have high emotional intelligence are able to have both the awareness of self and others, but also the skills to navigate those relationships with ourselves and with other people. So to me, being able to utilize and embrace emotional intelligence allows us to be more effective in our roles individually, but also within the networks that we call our organizations and our teams.
And given the amount of work you've done with so many HR leaders around the world, how do you see the role of human resources evolving to foster employee engagement in the future of work?
Well, what I would encourage my brethren and my peers in the HR space, I would encourage them to go beyond checking boxes, go beyond just the pre-filled forms and look at truly engagement for what it is and become stewards and champions of that. Develop the leaders that will be able to develop the teams and the culture that we want. Become the champions of those efforts. Look at it and remember that there is a human element to human resources. And as we look at that, embrace that role, become the role models of engagement, and look for the opportunities where we can truly create workplaces where benefits both the employers and employees. Too many times, human resources becomes a safeguard for the company, but employees don't feel embraced by that. They need to bridge that gap between the two and continue to support both sides effectively and be that steward, that keeper of the culture that they can be.
Great response. Can't have time for two more questions. How can smaller companies and startups, and this is the age of startups all over the world, how can smaller companies with limited resources build a strong engagement culture?
Wow. To me, this is the quintessential differentiator for, especially for startups and small companies that are starting out. The scale of the company, when it's a smaller company, it's actually easier to engage because leaders have direct access to their people within that. Think about a startup and the commitment that people make to invest their efforts, their blood, sweat, and tears to get a company off the ground. So many times, an inspiring visionary leader of a startup is asking people to trust. to put their efforts into this endeavor, a lot of times without being paid. So if you can engage them, you can still get the best out of people because they believe, they line their own interests up with yours. In a small company, it's that personal touch that the business owner, the entrepreneur has with his or her people that creates that engagement, that gets the best out of them, that support, that loyalty, that willingness to see the company as their own. So these things are essential. When you look at it, Ashutosh, for a company that's struggling, a small company, the disengagement that I talked about is not just in emotional cost. There is a financial direct cost of this. Across the globe, disengagement costs companies $8.9 trillion in lost productivity. For a small company, that means that for every $10,000 that I'm paying somebody in annual salary, it costs me $3,400 in lost productivity. Now multiply that by what the salary is and the number of people. You can see that for an entrepreneur that is wondering how they're going to make payroll this week, if they're losing that much money because of disengagement, this becomes an essential part of survival. And not just that, but it's going to differentiate them in the marketplace and become their competitive advantage.
Very well said. And my last question for you, Kon, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. What lessons would you want a lot of our young leaders to take away from the engagement blueprint?
What I would tell them is that as leaders, they have the unique ability to shape and create the kind of environment where people can feel engaged. When they provide that safety, that environment where people can feel valued, they can feel part of the team and included and connected to them. When they feel supported to learn and grow and feel productive in those efforts, they will give their best to these leaders. Ultimately, I will leave them with an expression that I've adopted. It's that the grass is not greener on the other side, Ashutosh. The grass is greener where you water it. Absolutely. So for leaders, water your garden, tend to your garden, cultivate that environment where people will thrive and their team will outperform all others.
Amazing. Kon, on that note and your very upbeat statement of the grass is not greener on the other side, but grass is greener where you water it. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your new book, The Engagement Blueprint, Building a Culture of Commitment and Performance. You know, as you were speaking, I was going back to my own journey over the last 4.5 decades as a corporate leader and as an entrepreneur. And I've often come across people who would come and tell me, oh, this is how it happens here. And I would tell them, no. I mean, we are a startup. There's nothing which is like a legacy system. And it was always a challenge, but an engaged employee, their performance was significantly higher than someone who was not engaged. I think we covered a lot of incredible ground on different aspects of engagement in an organization. I learned several new things from you in our conversation, and I'm sure my viewers and listeners will get a lot from the conversation that you had with me today. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
It's a pleasure, my friend. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.